Well, hello. Thanks for sticking around to watch this Q&A for Spring Valley, which is playing as part of the 2021 Independent Film Festival Boston. I'd like to introduce our participants. First, I'd like to welcome director Garrett Zevgetis. Welcome, Garrett.
Thank you so much.
Producer and editor Jeff Consiglio. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, thanks, Brian.
Hi. Activist Vivian Anderson from Every Black Girl. Welcome, Vivian.
Thank you.
And to moderate, we're bringing in Toronto-based critic and writer Jason Gorber. Welcome back, Jason.
Thank you very much.
We very much look forward to this conversation. And so, Jason, over to you.
Congratulations on the film. It's really quite striking about how you've navigated so many difficult issues in ways that are both inviting and provocative. Garrett, I'm just wondering if you could talk about how you were introduced to the sort of core narrative at the heart of the story and what prompted you to take this on as a documentary.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate doing this. Thank you for the conversation. Yes, it started with our core team. We had worked on a film before, Jeff Consiglio and Ariana Garfinkel, producers. And it was a passion project, and we said we wanted to do let's do another passion project, something that really fulfills us. And we were looking around for a story, and we came across this incident that we had all seen, that so much of the world had seen, and it just struck us, that we're seeing these viral videos over and over again, and then we just move on to the next one so quickly, no matter how much it affects us, and we never process it. And we just said, well, what would it mean to just drill down on one of these viral videos as deep as possible? And that's what we set out to do. And it was like peeling an onion, and it just went. And like Vivian always says, it's like you go down and you see this incident opened up a Pandora's box. So we just went down to South Carolina. We started contacting people and met so many incredible people, including Vivian Anderson, because Vivian Anderson is someone who, she didn't just move on to the next viral video. That something affected her deeply, and she went down to South Carolina because of it, moved there. And so that's why she becomes such an important part of our story.
Vivian, if you could talk about, you've obviously been approached to do media stuff before, perhaps you've even been approached to do documentaries before, but there's obviously a reticence to make sure that the story is being told not necessarily in the direction simply that you want, but simply told with the respect and the honor that the storyline requires. As a subject of this film, if you could talk about your interaction with the filmmaking and what it was like to have cameras in your face every day.
Yeah, so no, I haven't been approached to do documentaries before. That was the first time, and it wasn't. I think what shifted for me was that I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna have it about the girls, and it's about the girls, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we want to talk to you, and I was like, me, okay, and I'm grateful because everybody knows me. I'm totally transparent. I was just like, okay, here are these white folks doing stuff about Black girls. What it's going to look like? Is this like this exploitation? What does it look like? But I am so grateful that I have two brothers now. I got a sister now. I got tons more children, because the experience itself was that I can see the heart. Like, I'm always talking about the humanity of people. And so what I loved about working with Garrett and Jeff and Ariana is that they were really looking at the heart of the story, the human side of the story, not just, oh, we want to do this. I didn't know what documentary was like. I know I watch them on, Netflix and all that stuff, but I didn't know what it was like. And it was never a time where I felt like my life was just like overexposed or things were like really hectic. They made it really comfortable for me. And my whole thing was like, they really helped me understand the importance of getting this story out. And one of the things that I teach the girls is that all possibility lies in uncomfortability. And so even those times where I was uncomfortable, it's because something new and possible can be created. So they made being uncomfortable comfortable, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And one thing I will say, if you're not familiar with the documentary, they're rarely this good. I will absolutely say that. And Jeff, if you could talk about sort of the process of ensuring that this film was not just going to become a polemic, that it was not just going to be not forget single-sided, but certainly blind to the nuance within the storytelling that was required for something this sensitive and this provocative.
Well, we knew going in that somehow we're going to have to figure out a way to spend enough time to get into that nuance, because it's very easy to try to label this story quickly. That's what people do with viral videos. It's very, very difficult to find the truth of the story. And when we discovered Vivian, we realized that, she's the one who showed us how to walk the walk, right? Sorry, I have a little bit of something over here. Can you guys excuse me 1 second?
Uh-oh.
See real life stuff all day, every day. So you get to have grace for it.
So why don't we switch over to Garrett? If you could just talk about the of diving into a story that required this kind of narrative sophistication.
You asking me?
I'm asking you because Jeff has decided to leave.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I want to say is that this is so much about context. I want to kind of go back to what you're saying, but it's like, and when we talk about context, it's not like some people say, oh, it was, we didn't see the whole video. You hear certain people say, oh, we don't know exactly what happened, and so we're not going to judge. And that's not the case. That's not the context we're talking about. We're talking about the context of systemic racism and all the things that led up to that moment. So, that's one of the things we often see here is that some people just want to look at these as isolated incidents, each one in a vacuum. And what's so important about going down and drilling deep is understanding that no, this is a pattern, this is a through line, this is not isolated. But that didn't specifically answer your question, Jason, right? So
well, let's look at it this way. You obviously deal with systemic racism and you deal with this stuff, but again, following Vivian's lead, you are not simply telling the story. Forget from one perspective. You are trying to get access to the truth, and one major way of getting access to the truth is hearing from all participants, or all the ones that you can get. So your inclusion of other voices and other stories doesn't deny you having a point of view and certainly what you believe is right or wrong, but you are not closing off the voices of those that may disagree with you as filmmakers and as participants. If you could just talk about the challenge of doing all of that.
So, by the way, so sorry, everybody. Just had a water emergency in the room right next to me.
All good.
And a pipe broke. It's covered now. Perfect timing.
Anyway, Garrett, sorry, if you could address that.
Well, one thing that it brings up, I feel like, Jason, is because one thing I want to talk about is one of our core producers is Chico Covard, who's been a mentor of mine in Boston for a long time. He's one incredible filmmaker. And one thing we when we were struggling with, we absolutely wanted to look at all the participants, look at the whole story. But then when Chico came on, one thing he really talked to me a lot about is you can't be neutral. And he would talk about, there's an old saying, you can't be neutral on a moving train, that he would bring up. And so you have to keep your point of view, but at the same time hear all the stories. So that it's this delicate balance we had to struggle with the whole time, but we had to stay true to our convictions. And so Chico saying that was just, to me, was so important. And so that one thing we will never, we journalistically, we wanted to hear everybody's story, but we will never say that what happened to Shakar that day was, and there was any rationale for that. There's nothing. It was completely wrong. She was assaulted. So that's the premise we kind of started, came from. But I don't know if Jeff, did you want to follow up with Jeff? Or?
Yeah, well, you got to tell me what the question was.
Hi, Jeff. Yeah, we were obviously talking about threading a delicate balance between a film having a point of view and a film being a polemic. A film being simply hammering a point of view without giving space for those that may disagree with the point of view of the filmmakers or other core participants, and giving them room to articulate their vision without necessitating a bland equality.
Well, that kind of gets back to what I was trying to start to talk about when the pipe burst, which, by the way, is a mirror of documentary filmmaking. Whatever you try to do, something's going to disrupt what you're doing. You have to go with the flow. That's a bad word for the moment, flow. But again, it's easy to have an immediate point of view. It's easy to immediately label, as I was trying to say earlier, to just go in and say X is X. This is what we see. This is what it is. It's our opinion. It's bad. This guy is bad. This thing is bad. This guy is bad. Done. Let's move on. And it's extremely difficult to dig deeper into that, and it's very difficult to get an audience to want to do that digging. We knew that was the critical objective of this film. It's the challenge of this film, and it had to happen. We had to find a way to get an audience to get past all of that immediate need for judgment and satisfactory labeling, so that they could say, well, actually, I can't say what the bad thing is here. I can't say what the good thing is here, because everything is so nuanced here. I have to do more work to understand it better. And again, what I had hoped to say earlier was that when we dove in and we didn't know which foot to put in front of the other, and we're hesitant because we're white filmmakers trying to tell this story, we're thinking, how can we do this without inadvertently being one-sided or too thin in our storytelling? And again, it was Vivian who taught us that you don't spend any time thinking about it. You just do. You pick up that foot and you move it. You just go. I've never met anybody in my life who just goes like Vivian goes. She just went down to South Carolina, and she leaves South Carolina to go help the next person whenever someone is in need. And that's just sort of don't think, just do, taught us to just keep digging, just keep filming, keep talking to people, keep asking the questions, because the thicker you go into it, the more you find those elements of nuance, so that you can then present the case to the audience to say, think through this so that you can see the complexity of it and arrive at the courage for the conversation you need to have to try to find some measure of an answer. So again, like Garrett just said, I'm not sure if that answered your question. But
Absolutely. Vivian, one of the things that comes up with the film, which is I've actually heard quite a bit recently, obviously, given the stories that have been coming out of the United States, is a certain level of exhaustion, not just in terms of the systemic issues, but the exhaustion in simply telling the story and being put in the position of responsibility of having to teach those that by any justification should already know the complexity and already know the notion of the story. Just wondering if you could talk about yourself being not only the subject of this documentary, but somebody who's being put in a position in some ways of having to speak to a larger issue. Are you ever exhausted by being the person at the center of the story, of having to teach people that clearly should know the things that they are ignorant of?
I don't know. Well, exhausted can come from a whole lot of things, because if you work with young people, if you have children, you're going to be exhausted, right? And so because this is something that I think I've been called to do, and I don't really look at it as like, oh, I got to teach you this. There's an awareness and awakening, and there's grace and space we get to have with folks, because my lived experience hasn't been your lived experience. And yes, that does take a lot, because it's just like, hey, here's my lived experience. And sometimes I'm like, ooh, what are we going to go with this? But I think all of us have a responsibility on this planet to have it look different than the way we see it, or what we came in. We got to leave something different for the generations behind us. So yeah, it does get tiring, but not tired in the way, tired in like, and I heard Reverend William Barber out of North Carolina, and you've seen him a lot, do a whole lot of work around racial and social injustice. I'm tired at the fact that we have to keep saying it, but I'm not tired at the point that I'm gonna stop, right? Perfect. And so I would say that's where I am. I know that I'm gonna I know how to rejuvenate myself. It's all kind of things out here, but I know because I've been called, there's something that's gonna keep me going. I'm just tired of the fact that we gotta keep having this conversation.
Now, that being said, one of the more remarkable aspects of the film entirely is your, frankly, sense of grace. Your ability to sit down with somebody who clearly fundamentally sees what seems factual from a completely different perspective, but sitting down and engaging with them and not closing them down the way that people wish to close you down. if you could talk about that process, where that comes from, where that strength of character comes from, and whether you got pushback from those, even within your own community, for going ahead and spending as much time with the officer as you did.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I got pushback. They were like, I had my folks say, you the one, better you than me. I'm not doing it. And it was really the fact that, like, I have this thing where it's like everybody, we always talk about we want peace in the world and we want this unity and we want everybody, we're fighting so everybody can be seen and heard. I am not God and I can't dictate who gets to be seen and heard, right? And because I know you're still going to connect with Black people and Black, you live in this world, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to keep connecting because maybe whatever it didn't happen overnight. I don't really know how old Ben feels is. It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to change overnight. But if I'm going to do this work, I'm in this work for the long haul, and whatever presents itself. So Ben Phil was, and that wasn't my, I wish it was, but it wasn't, because I believe in restorative justice, but that was not my idea to sit down with him. That was the films. And because I trusted them, I knew that whatever is going to happen here is supposed to happen. And once again, like having, people see a whole story about it. I wrote, like, there's this, because of the film, and I might be coming off topic, but because of the film, I didn't realize what I was doing, but now I call it the 100 steps. And so when I watch a video, it's not just looking at the video. What were the 100 steps that led to it? Who were the 100 people involved? And what are the ways, like, that's the 100 steps to that incident assault, as I call it. And then the 100 steps to, like, actually be in that moment. And then what's the 100 steps needed so we can actually have something look different later? And I think the film captures that so well. And it's actually helped me in the work I'm doing in Florida and other places now, because it's always like, there are so many sides to a story, but what was the actual things that we can actually start taking action to that led to those moments? So
I just want to drill down on that a little bit closer. Was it the film that had you sit down with Ben, or were you already going to be doing that? In other words, did the making of the documentary shape the way you do your activism?
Well, so for me, for a moment, there was no way that, like, when I came, he was not my focus. I'm going to be honest. He was not my focus. But the work I was doing, and I've often done restorative justice, bringing people together, harmers and folks who have been harmed together. The film, actually, they said, can you sit down with Ben? And I was like, right now, I don't know if I sit down with him, he hurt a Black girl. Wait a minute. I don't know if I can sit down, But then it came over me and I was like, I prayed about it. And I was like, okay. It had to come up for a reason, because this is the work you do. You don't get to decide who gets to be restored. And so them bringing it to me even opened me up more to the people I sit down with, because I do want to, like, end harm and, against Black girls. And I can't do it from one side. And that was one of the things that, as I move forward, those are things that, even though I was doing it in community, doing it in the most uncomfortable spaces. And that was a very uncomfortable space that didn't become uncomfortable to me anymore, because I didn't see this person who, oh, you're just this harmer who's going to harm me. I was like, no, we're going to stop your harm. And if this is my call, we're going to stop this harm. And I'm going to go harder than you with, and I'll stand toe to toe with anybody when it comes to the safety of Black girls.
Garrett, if you could talk about, again, that process. A lot of people may be surprised about how the documentarians are shaping the narrative in such an overt way, but it's clear with a story like this, you set things up, the camera obviously affects things, but the very making of a documentary affects things, just like having a camera in the classroom has affected this entire narrative. Without cameras there, without cameras on the streets elsewhere in the United States, simply the entire narrative of everything that is taking place in terms of this core story would not be the same. If you could just talk about how all of that has been reshaped by the events, even in the last several years.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. It definitely, it's it's just, this whole thing happened because, Naya Kenny was brave enough to pull out her phone and tell the other students to film what happened. And that's part of what we're seeing here. And I hadn't made that connection to what we did, but I totally agree with you. And what we didn't want to go down and try to be a fly in a wall. The way I try to do things is separate this kind of otherness between a filmmaker and a subject. It's I can't operate that way. And so I just want to get to know everybody involved, and I didn't know anything going down. I just want to learn. And so when I was getting to know Vivian, one thing about Vivian is she'll talk to anybody. She talks about how conversations are so important. And then, I also got to know, the way I looked at it as I wanted to get to know Ben, I wanted to understand his justification for what was going, how could he justify this? And I felt like I could use some of my white privilege as a white male that, he might open up to me initially, and he did. And we got to talk, we spent a lot of time talking. But both of them, I could realize, we're comfortable conversations. So I just asked both, would you like to meet? I didn't know how that was going to go down at all. But I just knew, I trusted, that Vivian will have a conversation with anybody, and that's part of her work. And I knew Ben would. And so that their relationship, then they had a relationship. We were all surprised that they had a relationship that came out of that. We didn't know how that was going to end. We didn't know if it would end up in screaming or anything like that. But so yes, I think in terms of, is trying to make this as organic as possible. We're just all people, that's my kind of process. And then to get so comfortable that I think we're all more comfortable with cameras now, so if I can get, and then even the cinematographer, get everybody needs to know him or her. And then it's natural to have a camera just going. And then everybody has to trust that we're going to do something okay with that footage. We're not going to exploit anybody. So that was kind of rambling. Sorry, Jason.
Please stop apologizing. You're apologizing to a Canadian. We have a trademark on that. Jeff, there's one particular editorial moment where you actually let Ben just sort of stew on his answer. You have this pause where you can see him reflecting not only on the complexity of the situation, and after that pause where you see all these sort of calculations going on, he gives the sort of rote answer that essentially somewhere between I was following policy and I was following orders, if you want to get really dark about it. Mm-hmm. Talk about that moment of leaving in his processing, as it were, showing the calculation, but also the humanity of that moment.
Yeah, there was not a question ever from the moment we saw that footage that we would cut there. Actually, even before I saw the footage, I was not there that day when they filmed. So after that shoot, the first thing I heard was about that moment. And in that moment, I knew that it was going to live, probably going to live in the film in that way, because this is how you get truth. To the question you just asked a moment ago, cameras are now the way that truth gets out. We're seeing that in classrooms. We're seeing that on the street, obviously. And even in documentary films, people get more and more accustomed with cameras. It's the way that truth gets out into the world. And in that moment, there was no interference with the truth of what he was doing, which was processing that question and making his decision on how to answer. And kudos to Garrett and our cinematographer, Alex, in that moment for just sitting there and letting it happen and not trying to change the moment there. Because that was at 45 seconds of truth in observing him. And you don't see that very much in our storytelling these days, because people are of the opinion that you need to keep people's attention. But humanity is attention grabbing in our world. And that was a human moment. Whether without judgment, you can talk about good or bad. We're not talking about good or bad. It was a human moment of a human being doing a lot of processing that we could see and feel. So we knew that there was never going to be any change to that moment. We needed to feel it. And it's exactly that dive into the nuance that we were talking about earlier. This is what gives you insight into him as a human being. So you can take your judgment of him and increase the depth of that, and then move from there then you're so much more informed about him for the rest of the film. You have more insight into what might be going on in his brain when he answers every single other question in the film. So it's incredibly invaluable for a moment like that to happen on camera, whether the character is a very good person, a very bad person, somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. That depth is just invaluable because it forces the audience to settle into that nuance.
Vivian, you spoke about the 100 steps sort of before and after the incident. And again, I know you don't come from the world of film. We're all film nerds, the rest of us. But one of the things that we obsess about is what's outside the frame, which is the notion of what took place before the camera started shooting, what took place outside, what is not being captured by what's actually being shown. I'm wondering if you could talk about the challenges of stories like this from all members, from members within the community and without, of wanting so desperately to simplify things into good guys and bad guys, of people that did nothing wrong and people that did everything wrong, and ignore the true crux of the issue, which are the systemic institutions that provide laws like you act up in class, you get arrested. That being the core issue, not this one incident, but the grander incident. People really want to have good guys and bad guys. They want to make this a sport. But you are doing the work of showing that sort of nuance and sophistication. How difficult is that for you to even explain within members close to you that that's really where the work and the hard work needs to be done?
Yeah, I'm going to try my best to answer this. I think one of the things is that, and I think somebody said it earlier, and I just wanted to put some context or some distinction around it, right? I believe one of the things is that we can always have him rationalize what he did, right? But there will never be a justification. I think the justice part and the ratification are two different things. And so when I'm working and when I'm talking to folks and folks are like, well, how can you do this? Why are you doing this? And I was like, because Ben feels, and as we know, when we look at the documentary, could have been one of hundreds, right? And so if I can remove the individual and have folks say, let's not see the individual, let's look at the actual issue. And that's how I've been able to move. And as I talk to folks and have them like, let's start, because once we start, like you said, once it's good or bad, right or wrong, it's always somebody is a higher this or a higher that. And it's like, no, we're not looking at good, bad, right or wrong. What works in the system, what's not working in the system, and where are the places we have to change? Because I'm really want to be solution oriented. And if I'm always looking at somebody to be right or wrong, good or bad, that's blame and shame. And blame and shame only creates more hurt and harm. And so if we can remove that and look at okay, let's really look at all the things that led up to this. And there were many things that led up to this. And we all get to have our, if that's the case, nobody is good, or, everybody is wrong according to I'm a spiritual person. So everybody is wrong. We ain't been walking this journey correctly, but who gets forgiveness, who gets to, and once again, and I want to be very clear, and I've said it, I think it shows in the film, and I've talked to Ben about it a lot. I'm not ever going to justify what you did. What you did, it could have, you never saw a child, but do I understand how you got here and not seeing this Black child? Absolutely. And that's the system that I want to dismantle. And you can be easily replaced over and over again. But until then, I get to keep being with folks. So it's a constant everyday work. And it's something that I said yes to. I was like, okay, God, okay, yes. And I'll keep doing it because there's so many there. Shakara was not the first. She wasn't the last. Because we've had more cases since, right? I'm in Florida. I was in Florida because a girl was slammed unconscious by a school resource officer. How do we see Black girl bodies? And that's something that we really have to talk about. And that's what I loved about the film, because it took us on some historical context and how the different things historically led to this moment. So when we talk about the 100 steps before, in everybody, there's 100 steps before, right? And so just to keep pushing folks to see, don't get caught up. And I'm not one. So yes, I'm still not used to cameras. I'm still not used to any of that. But we need to look at, when we watch it, are we in reaction or are we ready to respond? So my commitment is to respond and respond responsibly versus reacting and saying, oh, I just got to go down there and da-da-da. It was really to go and say, how did this take place? what's happening and what's the role that I have. I feel like I'm responsible for a lot of things. If I don't make a vote, if I don't go sit at a school board meeting, if there are things that happen, I led to that. So those are one of the things. And when we remove blame, we can understand what responsibility looks like in making this world a better place for everybody.
Beautifully put. I think that there's a fundamental difference between seeing this narrative as simply one person attacking another person and ignoring the notions of criminalizing children in school, the notions of having actual members of the police force within an educational environment and all the reasons for that. There are certainly arguments for and against, particularly in a nation where absolutely when you reference things like school shootings, things are very horrendous within that notably safe environment. But I think what your work does and what this documentary shows is that you're going beyond the binary of good versus bad and looking for solutions. That being said, do you see this documentary as helpful or hurtful for the work that you are doing?
I think it can be helpful. Like, I really think it can be helpful because one of the things, and I talk to Jeff and Garrett and Ariana all the time, I was like, and even in the film, you see me like, I know people gonna come for my throat. They gonna understand, they ain't gonna understand. But if folks can walk away from anything, it's like, walk away saying like, how can I dive deeper into the 100 steps to actually have it be a solution-driven concept? Because even when they say policing in schools, because everybody, I know it's a larger context when we talk about defund the police, when we talk about removing officers from schools, we're really talking about, and we talk about it, it's talked about in the film and it's brought about, where it's like, no, we're not, we're actually talking about the policing of children in all ways, right? And what happens particularly to Black and brown children, and now what's happening to Black girls specifically. And there are other girls of color who are experiencing this, but having people really dive in and say, what are the things I'm not looking at when I look at a viral video? And there's so many things, and we're all ADD when it comes to social media and everything. So we like or we don't like, but we don't take time to study, learn, and look for like, what is it that I'm supposed to do in this moment to have this be different?
Garrett, one of the film would not be the same. Obviously, you wouldn't have a film without Vivian. It would not be the same if you didn't have Ben. And one of the frustrations of any documentary are those that choose to not participate. The teacher, and more importantly, the school, the African-American school vice principal administrator who was in the room at the time and witnessing it, which again makes bare the notion that the racial context of this is much more complex than white cop, Black girl.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If you could talk about what you guys did to try to get them involved and how challenging was it to navigate all of the politics, all of the potentially legal consequences of making a film like this?
It was, we tried everything. We wanted to talk to everybody. And eventually we did end up talking to the school. The school, you know, as you see, you can see there's shots inside the school. And the school did let us in to film, and I interviewed the superintendent and I interviewed some other people, and I tried to interview the teacher, but the teacher, when I talked to him, he just hung up on me. I just said, hi, how you doing? As soon as I brought it up, he literally hung up on me. And which, you know, right there told me, okay, there's something, you realized you did something wrong here. Yeah. But also the administrator, when I tried to, you know, he said he wanted no part of it because he's still working in schools. And so a lot of people, they just want to move on. They, even after, you know, Ben Fields did it that day, he had moved on. He was out there teaching football. Even after he did that, it was just something he did earlier in the day. He didn't even realize it was filmed and, you know, what the implications were. This is just how things are working down there. So when I did get to the school and when they finally let me in and I spoke to them, the superintendent admitted to me, he said, we let the lines blur between officers in our school. And he said, you know, we're changing that now. And this is a fundamental issue that I think people need to understand, Jason, is that these police are not employed. We mentioned in the film, but they're not employed by the principal or the school. The principal is not their boss. They walk in and they have carte blanche. They're like, they walk just no, they don't answer to anybody. They start patrolling the hallways, and no one ever checks on what they're doing. There's no oversight. No one in the school even knows who hired this guy and what his background is. And so this is a fundamental. So they admitted they let the lines blur, and they told me they're going to change that. About 2 months later, we find out that the other officer at that school was sexually assaulting had been for years as students there, and he was one of the ones that helped arrest Shakara. So they told me, "Oh, we stopped letting the lines blur with police and schools," and a few months later, it's find out, no, you did not. So yes, I think this is very, very touchy because we're talking about kids and schools, and the politics are really, and then the sheriff, I interviewed him, but he wasn't doing anything about this, and he knew that officer was in there doing what he was doing. So it's very, very complex and complicated, but that's why we need to talk about it.
We talk about systemic issues all the time. Systemic, we just throw out systemic. And we realize we have literally here a system whereby police officers that are getting into trouble on the street are given the cushy position of patrolling schools. That as a sort of form of punishment, they're taking out of a quote unquote criminal environment and put in where students are perps. I'm going to go back to you, Vivian, because I think that you have an opportunity here to speak to the girls, now women, at the center of this story. First of all, what's their reaction to not only their story being told and amplified, but also some of these more sophisticated and nuanced things that for them might feel, well, you're somehow undermining my own pain by bringing in all these other aspects. I am one person and I got hurt. I don't care necessarily about systemic issues. I'm the one that got my head thrown on the ground when I was in a desk. If you could just talk about that very specific and very direct reaction of those that literally were victimized by this system.
Yeah, I think one of the things, the girls haven't had that reaction. They really are like, this happened. And then I think it's like, because we were able to be together, and, I have a saying, life does not happen to you, it happens for you. And no child should experience what you're experiencing. But if this moment wasn't all of your life, why do you think this moment happened? Right. And so we have Naya, who was like, I want to do a conference. When I asked her, how can I support? I want to do a conference every year to bring awareness. That's what's happening to so many girls, not just me. Shakara, who's just like, I just don't want it to happen to anybody else. Now, does she want to be on camera all the time and doing all this? No, she wants to actually create a life where she can move beyond this, which she's doing. But it hasn't been that where their response has been like, I only care about me. The thing is, they show up. Naya stood up because she cared about somebody beyond herself. Shakara sees care, like she wants to work with, she's like, I think I would be a great social worker. They see, like, I think this gave them an opportunity to say, oh, people will show up for us. And if I can be on this planet, maybe I can show up for somebody else. So it was times where, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm just going to push back a tiny bit. They're younger, and for very justified reasons, they may be angrier in a very specific way, in a very personal way. I'm wondering, have they learned from you that sense? It's not patience in the sort of passive way. It's an understanding that the battle is bigger than one person, one incident, one institution.
Yeah, and I think they knew some of that stuff before. It's just that in this, they had the opportunity to have their worlds like really say, we see stuff, because even beyond those two folks, I had girls talking about, well, this happens all the time. Why are you so focused on? It wasn't them saying, why are you focusing on me? Folks like, this is happening all over the place. And even the girls were like, this is not the first time, or this is not new, but hey. And I think one of the things that happened is that they saw, I really believe that they saw like, hey, who I am on this planet does matter, and people will show up. And if it means my story having to be the lead point to it, I'm game, because I know I'm going to be held. And one of the other things, and I just have to say that I loved about the Filmmakers, is because they gave the girls grace. When a girl said, no, I don't want to be filmed, it was no pressure. It was not like, oh, you have to. It's never been like, it's your responsibility to hold this and like to make sure this word gets out. It's like, your story is powerful, and this is what we want to share because it can shift other lives. But anytime you're a no, we're yes for your no. And that's one of the things I appreciated them working with them. And that's how the girls move. Anytime they weren't ready and they were being girls, because they are girls, they're now women, but they weren't women then, they were girls. They had the opportunity to say, yes, I want to take a stand. No, I want to fall back. Let me just focus on me, and having that grace and space. That's why I talk about the 100 steps. Even when it happened, there was a whole lot of stuff that needs to happen to make sure the ones who are harmed are taken care of, that we address the harmers in a certain kind of way, where we're really looking at what does it mean for folks to like actually heal, so tomorrow can look different. Because this could have looked a lot of ways where they continue with their hurt and their harm, and then how they move forward. But I think one of the things in like being a part of like watching this film be created, I watch the girls like transform. I'm constantly watching them transform, where it's like they get to understand, and they understand they get to decide like that happened to you, but it's not your life. It's not your it does not dictate how you're going to move in the future, which has shifted. For some girls didn't have this story. So they really get like me just speaking, but I get to decide when and how I want to speak. And I think that was one of the things that made this film possible, because they were always given grace and space to be girls, to say, hey, you just might want to go shopping. Let's go shopping. Or you just may want to sit at home and do nothing. And that's okay. And having that grace and space, because in that moment, there's still healing that needs to take place, because folks were actually harmed. They were both introduced to a juvenile justice system. And we know once a child is introduced, how hard it is to get out, and then like battling with that. And so, and knowing that like everywhere I go, this is how people are going to see me, because this is a film out there. And so a lot of the work I did with them was around like not making this hold them back for having thriving lives.
Jeff, you're on mute, just so you unmute. If you could talk about the sort of, the story begins not with 100 steps back, but a million steps back. That when we actually hold up the brick and we see that the brick is actually coated in moss, the world is erasing a certain kind of history of South Carolina, which is the bedrock of so much of what takes place in this film. If you could talk about that framing device, it would obviously have been this, in many ways, an easier film to extract that entire geographical trip, but it's there for very specific and very idealized reasons. If you could just talk about the inclusion and how you pepper that throughout the film in terms of editorial.
Yeah, we when we started this film, we knew that we wanted to make South Carolina itself a part of this story, because this came from a place that has quite a history. So we wanted to find a way into the land. And Garrett found Janae Davis, who is our geographer, who taught us, showed us the, sorry guys, one more moment, sorry, hold on one second.
Okay, Garrett, let's just ignore Jeff right now, and we'll go to that, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, it was so much about, we knew it was about context. This whole film, Jason was supposed to, I viewed it as, we wanted to make a film that was the opposite of a viral video. It's, where there's no context. So, and we're going to talk about context. We can't just talk about, why was the officer, what was the officer doing before? We need to talk about what was the officer doing before he came in that classroom. Who called him into the classroom? That's part of the context. Who is that officer? Where's the sheriff's department? That's part of what's going on in the town, the laws that let him go in there. That's part of the context. But if we're going to talk about context and race involved, you cannot not talk about slavery. And where did slavery start? It happened there in South Carolina, and not far from there. And when there was that was going on, and at the same time I was talking to Jeff, and we knew it's about the land, and we can't fit all of that history into a documentary. But when you talk about the land, it's not about language; it's about the land, and that's why I was looked for. I called the University of South Carolina Geography Department, and I asked, "Is anybody studying race and land here?" And they said yes. Well, there's one person. Her name is Janae Davis. And and I connected with her, and she talked to me about how the trauma that is on that land and how she's been studying that. And so right away I knew that that's the connection, because this goes beyond words. There's no way, we don't have language that can encompass the wrongs and the hurt that has happened there. So that's just, all comes back to context. It was just so.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I have wetter hands and feet during this Q&A than I had during the swamp filming with Janae Davis in the swamps. I apologize for twice now, and yeah, there's a pipe that's burst or something over there, so I'll take care of it later. But anyway, I'm sure Garrett.
Welcome to indie filmmaking.
And yeah, it's indie filmmaking in the Q&A. But as Garrett, I'm sure Garrett just answered your question, but we wanted that richness of detail of what is the place from which these people emerge, what is the place from which this story emerged, all the way back through time up to this moment and then beyond. And I think, you know, perhaps one thing that maybe Garrett didn't get into is the way that we mixed it throughout the story, which was your question, Jason, is Janae just gave us such an incredible insight into how to look at the big picture through a small lens, how the big picture can be broadcast through a moment like that moment in the classroom. So we knew that we had a way to frame the beginning of the story. We had a way to frame the end of the story through her, what she was teaching us from Murphy Island. So it became clear to us that we wanted to introduce the land as something you're going to learn about through this classroom incident, and then visit it in the middle of the film. So we could say, let's get our education here in the middle of the film, continue our story, and then have her come back and wrap it back up and say, this is how a brick on an abandoned island can relate to a child in a classroom, can relate to a police officer, can relate to an institution, can relate to all of us. So it was the perfect opportunity for us to, the perfect means for us to try to expand the story beyond, again, into that space of nuance.
And Vivian, I'm going to give you the last word. I'm going to ask yet another challenging question. In so many ways, this documentary is a beginning, not an ending. In so many ways, these viral videos encapsulate something which is incredibly difficult, but is so easy to see through a very narrow lens. I'm wondering for you how this process of making this film and what this film has meant to you will shape the work that you do moving forward, and whether you feel optimistic in an age where people are watching viral clips to get everything and making judgments in whatever ways based on a 30-second clip and thinking that's the truth, that's everything that took place, ignoring the 100 steps before and ignoring the 100 steps after. If you could talk about how all of that is shaping not only your activism, but just your faith in humanity, frankly, and the ability for some sort of reconciliation, or at least the beginnings of healing, to take place in these incredibly troubling times.
Yeah, I think probably because I'm just a faith-built person, and so I'm always, if I'm not optimistic, if I don't have that, y'all gonna take me down a rabbit hole I can't get out of, and so I don't want to be in that rabbit hole. But even so we had Ma'Khia Bryant, who was shot and killed by an officer, and I wasn't there, but I was supporting people on the ground. And I was like, it's easy to go and pop in front of a camera. I want you to know, go beyond, let's get to all the things. So now it's not just about the officer. We're going to address that, but now we're addressing foster systems, right? What were the things that took place in that house prior to? How are the folks who still have to live beyond it? And so watching folks actually look at a video and say, oh, instead of making, we all see our hurt and pain, and we can make just an analysis or judgments. But when they decide to go, I watch more where folks are like, oh, what are the things we really need to know? How are we really going? And so I'm really excited about that. Like I said, the work in Florida, I was like, okay, I sat with the principal. I'm sitting with PDs, public defenders, work that's actually occurring now in South Carolina, where I was like, what does it mean to really set solutions on changing the framework? Not just saying oh, this was terrible, this is happening. And yes, it's terrible and it's happening, But if we don't want it to happen, what are the things, and what are the things I have to do for myself? Because instantly there are times when I'm like, here we go again. And then I often stop and say, here we go again. So how do I do the work of reminding people, like, when are we going to stop saying, here we go again? And what are the things we have to do so we won't do this again? And there's a larger context. And you had said it earlier, and I just wanted to comment on the fact that one of the things that I think, because I was even blown away. I was like, wait a minute, why are we showing bricks and right? But I think one of the things is that I talk a lot about the historical context of slavery and enslavement and how it shows itself today, not in just this conversation around white against black, or how internalized oppression hasn't played its role. One of the things I think this film, I hope people see, is like, we also get to talk about gender justice, and how the history of enslavement dealt with gender specifically. And so Black girls' bodies, and looking at that whole nuance around that. And so I'm really hoping that folks are like, wait a minute, if I sit down and watch something, like, everybody ain't gonna do what I do. I actually watch documentaries, and I might have a pen and paper side, because I was like, I never know that. I want to go back and research that. So I want people to keep being, we don't need a school to do it, keep being their own educators and keep searching for the truth. And there's so many versions of it, but then do the truth that sits in your soul in such a way that you know this does not work for greater tomorrow, for the peace that we look for, and then you step into action. I can't give you what action you need to look for, but you'll know it for yourself when you actually deep dive and you go to 100 steps. And like you said, even 1,000 steps back, but I don't know why 100 came up. That was the thing that came to me in the middle of the night. And I was like, okay, Lord, am I supposed to get up and exercise 100 steps? But then it was like, no, it's really, how do we keep looking for not everything is, some stuff is right in front of us, but it's right in front of us to look at how did they come right in front of us. And so I'm very, the work that so many people are doing on the ground, the way that organizations are coming together, the way that film, disrupting films, like the way that film and the industry is looking at challenging our everyday. I'm just one of those people. I'm very optimistic. I'm not naive. I can be, but I'm not naive. I'm not saying this, it didn't happen overnight. It's not going to end overnight, but I think we have an opportunity, because of the way social media moves and the way the film industry is moving right now, to actually start being with our young people in a different way, where now when they see something, or if they're filming something, they're filming from a different lens, if that makes sense.
I am not taking anything away from your faith. I will simply stand up for the fact that I think a lot of this has to do with you and not who you were made by. I think these are your choices, and I applaud you for them. Thank you so much for your contribution. Congratulations on the film. Absolutely remarkable participant, remarkable story, and a film that gives us desperately needed nuance and the ability to continue a conversation rather than close our minds to what's already been established. Thank you guys so much. Congratulations on showing the film here at IFF Boston. And I look forward to audiences around the world getting a chance to see the story of these girls and this particularly remarkable woman.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
for sharing our story.
On behalf of the festival, thanks, Jace, for moderating this. Garrett and Jeff, thank you for sharing your film with us. And especially Vivian, thank you for sharing your story with us. We truly appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and take care.
Thank you.